For nearly 10 years he was a name whispered in the corridors of international intelligence, a figure who seemingly existed only in the white noise of encrypted servers. To the casual observer, Sean McGovern was a man with a negligible recorder, handful of minor traffic infractions, and the quiet life of a father of two. But as the doors of Dublin's Special Criminal Court opened this week, in May 2026, that carefully constructed mask finally fell away. The air in the courtroom was thick, with the weight of a decade's worth of secrets. As a detective superintendent began to read aloud the digital echoes of a man who thought he was untouchable. These weren't just text messages. They were the blueprints of a shadow empire, a rare look into the internal mechanics of the Kinahan organization that the public has never been permitted to see, until now. How does a man with no significant criminal history become the most trusted advisor to a global cartel leader? The answer lies in the psychological landscape of loyalty and the mastery of modern technology. By the early 2000s, McGovern had woven himself into the inner circle of the organization's Irish wing, but it was his move to Dubai that truly elevated his status. The United States Treasury didn't mince words when they placed him on a high-level sanctions list in 2022, describing him as the primary gatekeeper for Daniel Kinahan. If you wanted a meeting, if you wanted a deal, or if you wanted to move massive quantities of contraband across borders, you didn't go to the boss. You went through Sean McGovern. He was the filter, the shield, and the voice of the organization, managing a network built on the promise of unbreakable encryption. The prosecution's opening statements painted a picture of a man who operated with chilling efficiency from a laptop, thousands of miles away. The narrative being established in court isn't just about one man's actions. It's not about the dismantling of a myth. For years, the leadership believed that distance and digital layers provided a permanent sanctuary. They believed that by operating out of the reach of Western jurisdictions, they were immune to the consequences of the tragedies they orchestrated back home. But as the court listened to the granular details of McGovern's involvement, it became clear that the digital trail he thought he had wiped was, in fact, the very rope the state would use to bring him home. This section of the trial serves as the foundation for everything to follow. It establishes McGovern not as a foot soldier, but as a sophisticated director of activities. The investigative conclusions suggest that his role was pivotal in transforming a localized rivalry into a sustained international conflict. As we peel back the layers of this baffling mystery, we begin to see how the authorities utilized a combination of traditional detective work and cutting-edge cyber forensics to bridge the gap between a Dublin street corner and a luxury villa in the desert. The stage is set for a legal reckoning that has been 10 years in the making, and the evidence is only just beginning to surface. To understand the man sitting in the dock in 2026, one must look back at a time when the Dublin underworld was not a battlefield, but a boardroom. Before the summer of 2014, the two primary factions operated as a singular, cohesive network. There was an uneasy, yet highly profitable peace. However, a series of misunderstandings and intense encounters in Spain began to fray the edges of this alliance. The tension reached a breaking point in September 2015, when a senior associate, Gary Hutch, lost his life on the Costa del Sol. This was the spark that would eventually ignite a conflict that reshaped Irish society, but the fire truly began to rage in February 2016 at a location that has since become synonymous with the Poneera, darkest chapter of Dublin's criminal history, the Regency Hotel. It was a Friday afternoon, a standard boxing weigh-in, bustling with fans and families. In a calculated display of audacity, a team of men dressed as specialized tactical officers entered the lobby and opened fire. The chaos that followed was heart-wrenching. In the middle of the commotion, David Byrne, a high-ranking figure in the Kinahan organization, was the victim of a fatal act. Among the survivors who scrambled for safety in the frantic moments that followed was Sean McGovern himself. He didn't just witness the tragedy, he was physically impacted by it, sustaining injuries during the assault. Daniel Kinahan, the man believed to be the primary target, managed to slip away into the streets, but the psychological damage was done. The rules of the game had changed, and the response from the Kinahan side would be swift and absolute. In the days following the Regency, the digital airwaves were saturated with grief and fury. Investigators later recovered encrypted messages between McGovern and a senior handler known only as Cap. These exchanges reveal the exact moment the organization transitioned from a business entity to a vessel for vengeance. "It could have been 6 of us," Cap messaged, reflecting on the close proximity of the survivors. "They wanted you," McGovern replied, acknowledging the narrow escape of their leadership. It was here that McGovern made a vow that would define his next decade. "On my baby's life, I'm not stopping. They targeted us. This is personal." This wasn't the language of a reluctant participant. It was the oath of a man who had fully committed to a cycle of retribution. The fallout was immediate. Just 3 days after the Regency incident, the conflict claimed another victim, Eddie Hutch, a taxi driver and brother of a rival leader. He was a man who, by all accounts, was not an active participant in the criminal world, yet his loss of life signaled that the boundaries of the feud had evaporated. For McGovern, the trauma of the Regency and the subsequent vow of loyalty solidified his position as the organization's most devoted architect. He was no longer just a confidant, he was a director of activities, fueled by a personal vendetta that the state would spend the next 10 years trying to unravel. This era of violence created a digital trail of planning and coordination that would, much later, serve as the core evidence in his eventual downfall. The investigation into the activities of the Kinahan organization eventually led detectives to a piece of evidence that was as cold as it was calculated: a GoTeach 7 Prime GPS tracking device. This small piece of hardware would become the focal point of a baffling mystery surrounding the surveillance of Noel Kirwan. Kirwan was not a member of any criminal group. He was a working man, a lifelong friend of a rival family, whose only offense was being captured in a press photograph at a funeral. Prosecutors suggest that based solely on this perceived link, the organization decided he was a participant in the ongoing conflict. The logistics of the surveillance that followed reveal a level of technical sophistication that was unprecedented in Irish criminal history. The device was dispatched from France in October 2016, moved through a spy shop in Leeds, and eventually landed in the hands of Sean McGovern in Dublin. What investigators found next was a digital trail that led directly back to McGovern's doorstep. Surveillance teams tracked the movement of the device to his home address, where it was charged before being moved to a specialized safe house. In a subsequent search of that apartment, authorities discovered a laptop that would serve as the smoking gun. Forensic analysts found McGovern's DNA on the screen and the keyboard, alongside fingerprint-stained instructions for the tracking device hidden behind a mirror. This wasn't just circumstantial evidence, it was a biological and digital fingerprint linking the architect to the operation. Between November and December 2016, the laptop was used to log into the tracking portal at least 387 times. From the comfort of a chair, an operator was watching the movements of a man who had no idea his every turn was being monitored by a ghost in the machine. The precision of the surveillance reached a chilling crescendo on December 22, 2016. Noel Kirwan had taken his family to a restaurant in Clondalkin for lunch. As they sat down to eat, the technical settings of the GPS device were remotely altered. Previously, the unit had updated its location every 4 hours to preserve battery life, a standard stealth tactic. However, at 4:23 p.m., just as the family was preparing to leave, the reporting frequency was spiked to once every 30 seconds. This change indicates that the operator was no longer just monitoring a routine, they were guiding a target into a definitive position. The investigators analyzed these session records to show that the controller was watching in real time, as Kirwan dropped off his relatives and drove toward his own home on St. Ronan's Drive. The GPS log shows the vehicle arriving at its final destination at 5:07 pages m. Moments later, a fatal act occurred that would leave the community in shock. At least 7 shots were discharged, and the individual responsible fled the scene in a waiting vehicle that was later found destroyed at a nearby shopping center. The tragedy of Noel Kirwan highlights the heart-wrenching reality of these conflicts, where an innocent man's life is treated as a coordinate on a digital map. The evidence gathered from the laptop and the tracking portal provided the Special Criminal Court with a granular, minute-by-minute account of how modern technology can be weaponized. It was no longer a matter of if McGovern was involved, but how deeply the digital evidence could prove his role as the primary director of this technical surveillance. While the technical surveillance of the Kinahan case was unfolding, investigators discovered that Sean McGovern was simultaneously managing a parallel, high-stakes operation across international borders. Throughout 2017, the digital focus shifted toward a man named James Gately, an individual whose only perceived transgression was a public display of respect at a friend's funeral. In the world of the organization, such acts were interpreted as declarations of war. Within the encrypted digital realm, McGovern adopted the handle knife, coordinating with senior figures known only as Mallet and Bonus. This was a sophisticated, multi-layered pursuit that moved from the streets of Dublin to the industrial hubs of England, and eventually across the border into Northern Ireland. The investigative dossier reveals that McGovern was not merely a passive observer in this hunt. In January 2017, a tracking device was deployed on a vehicle outside Gately's family home. McGovern's involvement was documented not just through encrypted text, but through traditional telecommunications. He used his personal device to communicate with the number associated with the tracker. He was also observed harvesting personal images of the target's family from social media platforms, forwarding them to associates to ensure there could be no mistake in identification. When the target relocated to Belfast in an attempt to find safety, the organization did not falter. McGovern traveled to Birmingham to procure a fresh batch of specialized tracking hardware, returning to Dublin the same evening. Within days, he was observed by undercover units sitting in a van as it crossed into Belfast, personally surveying the target's apartment complex. The tension reached a breaking point when international intelligence agencies alerted Irish authorities that a specialized operative from Estonia, a man with a reputation for clinical precision, had been contracted to finalize the operation. They watched as this operative flew into Dublin and was ferried to a safe house in Blakestown. The intelligence work was so precise that when the tactical units moved in on April 6, 2017, they caught the organization completely off guard. Inside the safe house, they found an encrypted device and a sheet of paper containing Gately's Belfast address, along with the digital handles of the organization's high command. This was the breakthrough that the state needed to link the ground-level surveillance directly to the leadership in Dubai. The aftermath of this arrest triggered a wave of digital panic that investigators were able to document in real time. As the news of the operative's apprehension spread, McGovern's messages became increasingly desperate. "Time to get out of here before we're all in cuffs," he messaged a fellow associate. On the same day, McGovern was intercepted at Dublin Airport. Although the organization attempted to remotely wipe his encrypted device to destroy evidence, they were too late. A member of the Specialized Response Unit had already managed to photograph the active chat threads directly from the screen. These images provided an unfiltered look at the criminal psychology of a group that believed they were operating in a digital vacuum, only to realize that the state had been watching their every keystroke. For 7 years, Sean McGovern lived in a world of golden sands and perceived absolute immunity. In the high-rise luxury of Dubai, the shadows of his past seemed a world away, filtered through the safety of a jurisdiction that had no formal extradition treaty with Ireland or the European Union. He lived openly, despite an Interpol red notice and heavy international sanctions on his assets. To the leadership of the organization, Dubai was more than a home. It was a fortress, a desert sanctuary, where the reach of Western law supposedly withered in the heat. But the tide of international cooperation was shifting, and the walls of the fortress were thinner than they appeared. In October 2024, the silence was broken when Dubai police walked into McGovern's residence and placed him in custody, signaling the beginning of an unprecedented legal maneuver. The speed of the subsequent events caught the entire criminal landscape by surprise. Just 11 days after his arrest, the Irish Justice Minister arrived in Abu Dhabi to sign a landmark extradition treaty. While the treaty itself would take time to officially come into force, the two nations agreed upon a once-off special legal arrangement to facilitate McGovern's return. On May 28, 2025, a military Airbus lifted off from Al Maktoum International Airport under a shroud of total secrecy. This was not a standard transport, it was the highest-risk extradition operation Ireland had conducted in over 25 years, drawing comparisons to the most high-profile cases of the late 90s. Escorted by specialized defense forces, McGovern was flown directly into an armed escort and a special evening sitting of the court, where the reality of his situation finally became undeniable. By March 16, 2026, the weight of the evidence, the 387 digital sessions, the DNA on the hardware, and the intercepted encrypted chatted to a pivotal moment. Appearing via video link, Sean McGovern pleaded guilty to directing the activities of a criminal organization. This plea was a tectonic shift in the legal battle against the cartel. It was the first time a member of the Dubai-based leadership had been formally sentenced in an Irish courtroom. While the original charges related to the loss of life were set aside in exchange for the plea, the charge of directing such an organization carries a potential maximum of life imprisonment. Even with the standard legal discounts for a plea, the architect of shadows is now facing the better part of 2 decades behind bars, separated from the empire he helped build. The implications of this sentencing extend far beyond one man. The evidence read into the record this week serves as the foundation for the upcoming cases against the very top of the organization. A 200-page investigative dossier, drawing on the same encrypted traffic that dismantled McGovern's defense, has already been utilized by international authorities. As Daniel Kinahan sits in Alawir Central Jail awaiting his own legal fight, the precedent has been set. The sanctuary of the desert has been breached, and the digital secrets that were once thought buried have become the public record of a crumbling regime. The friend who sat beside the leadership for 10 years has now become the blueprint for their own eventual day in court, proving that in the modern era of justice, no distance is too great and no encryption is truly absolute.